I started out doing industrial films in Detroit, Michigan. That's where I grew up. And I was fresh out of high school, and a friend of mine suggested I try to do an industrial film. And what they are, they're in-house movies made for companies. I did 1 million of them, and I was acting, so I would work like 2 or 3 times a week making these little movies. My very first feature film was this one called Nightmare at Shadow Woods with Louise Lasser. Yeah, I think that was 1984 or something. And just prior to doing Skinner, I had done Shocker for Wes Craven and Lunatics: A Love Story, a small, independent, very sweet romantic picture about a shut-in agoraphobic who finally meets the love of his life, who's also crazy.
Hank has a few problems. Nancy's got troubles all her own. His are imaginary spiders, psycho rap musicians, and big, long needles.
After Lunatics, I had a taste for doing leading parts, but I had done a stint on one television show where I was the straight guy, and I found it so dull. I had never done a normal straight part. I'd only done character parts. And I never wanted to do that again. I thought it was a very, very lackluster experience, and so any movies that I was looking for were going to be offbeat horror or offbeat indies, and where I could, I felt, best serve the kind of actor that I was and still am. It was a straight-ahead audition. It was just a straight-ahead audition. I didn't know anybody. My agent sent me in there, and I read the script. They made it available, which is unusual, which I thought was cool. Because usually you only get sides. I went in and read for it. I knew if I read it like a crazy person that I wasn't going to get it. Those who are disturbed usually don't know it. And so I read it as a person much like myself, and they seemed to like that, I guess, and that's how I got cast.
So what brings you to a town like this?
Well, I don't know. Just sort of seemed like a nice place.
When I read Paul Hart Weldon's script, I was mostly surprised at the lack of gore within it. Of course, that would change, and I think a lot of those gory changes had to do with Ivan Naj's, directing style.
Walked across to the big mirror Father used to keep in his room, and I looked at myself in it, except that it wasn't me looking back at me. It was my mother.
I knew that I'd have to do a little bit of research as well to figure out the kind of psychosis that he had. I don't usually believe too much in studying types of people and characters like this, but in this particular picture I did have to know what kind of a guy Dennis Skinner was. I had to learn the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath. So this, to me, seemed like a psychopathic character that he wrote, and I played it that way. So I tried to be unassuming and charming, and whoever Dennis Skinner could, in his own way.
Ooh, I love this song.
I investigated a few characters before shooting it. I looked at John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer mostly, though. Dahmer was a little more recent, I suppose. I think he had just come on the scene, if I remember right. It was a difficult role to play. First, I was carrying that movie, which made it challenging. But second, I remember feeling that either the stuff with the water motifs were going to work, or they were not. Fortunately, I thought it worked well, so I was happy with the final result. This movie was supposed to be nothing more than a B-movie slasher based loosely off of popular movies of the time, like Silence of the Lambs. It was in the zeitgeist, people were thinking about that, and talking about that. And then I have a theory, I can't verify it, then as today, as the slasher movies are also big now and true crime murder stories about human monsters are big, they seem to happen in times of political turmoil. And back then, in the early 90s, we had just gotten out of the Bush administration and were getting into the Clinton administration, but there was a lot of social problems being unearthed at that time. I suspect that, for whatever reason, people seem to gravitate towards human monsters during those times, and I don't know why, but it sure seems like it. There is, I believe, a veneer of humanity, and it's about this thick. And from here to here, if you were to draw a chart, is our animal selves, and here's everything we've learned just in the last 10,000 years since agriculture. And I think we all instinctually know that, but we don't want to talk about it. And part of our fascination with serial killers is that it delves into that awful 9/10 of us, which is also filled with a lot of good things, but savage things that we don't really like to think about.
Oh, Jesus! I told you not to look when I was getting dressed! We're gonna have a talk, you bitch!
I did not know anything about Ivan Naj before I started this movie. I had met him first at the audition. I knew right away he was a director who knew what he was doing. He gave very little direction with regard to moment-to-moment acting. You know, Ivan was mostly a be sure the scene works at a basic level and then you can do whatever you want kind of a guy. Ivan also was fighting a major low-budget time clock. So we were burning through those scenes. I remember it was a very fast shooting schedule. I think it was about 2.5 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, which is incredibly fast. So, and long days, we always went overtime. So we would start at 8 a.m. and go to 8 or 9 p.m. in the evening. And he and I got along very well. It was unfortunate that Ivan was best known in the end for being Heidi Fleiss's boyfriend and not a director of these rather interesting pictures that he put together during his lifetime.
Anyway, when my mother died, he insisted on doing my mother's post-mortem. Why? I don't know.
Most of the effects in this picture were built in the K&B studios and then brought to set by an associate of theirs who would then, you know, do the effects on me and the skin suit and all that stuff. So their work is all over it. You know, I think at that time they were getting very, very busy. Skinner got excellent work from them, but they never showed up on set. I knew them when they did my makeup for Evil Dead 2. I did not know they would be so famous. I knew that they were incredibly talented guys. All of them had mad artistic genius. That they would be doing Oscar-nominated movies, you know, who knew?
I wanted you to see the real me.
There are some things in that movie for a major release picture, or medium release picture, I guess, for a slasher, that are so offensive that they could not be done today. Nobody would allow that. And I am speaking not just of the gore, which was fairly common in those days, as it is today. Nothing much has changed. But there is a scene in that movie where Dennis is deeply offended by a coworker. And after he murders him, he puts on his skin, as he does with all of his victims, and chases around a girl in this warehouse. But the skin that he puts on is an African-American guy who he killed. And Dennis is imitating him in a most vulgar fashion. And it was difficult to shoot that. It's not something that is within me, most certainly, but that offended a lot of people. It's something that wouldn't be done today.
Yes, baby! Yes, baby!
We shot that movie in and around downtown Los Angeles. The neighborhood, for example, that is Dennis Skinner's area that he hunts in and visits Ricky Lake in and meets Tracy Lords in, is a neighborhood in Echo Park. The scene where Dennis is chasing that girl through that warehouse was shot in an abandoned warehouse in downtown LA, something that it doesn't exist anymore because prices have skyrocketed so much in 20 years that there aren't any more just abandoned warehouses floating around down there. They're all gone now. They're all condominiums or they've been turned to parking lots. And as it happened, a lot of the stuff we shot in Echo Park was convenient for me because at that time I had an apartment in Echo Park on Calumet Avenue. But it was only a block, weirdly, from where we were shooting. Now, Los Angeles, for those who don't know, is an enormous, enormous city, dozens and dozens of miles long. To find a movie that shot a block and a half that you happened to be working at was great. So I did something that only usually New York actors can do. I walked out of my apartment in the morning, walked a block and a half to set.
Why are you letting him do this to me?
I loved working with Tracy Lords. Tracy is exactly the kind of actor that I prefer to work with, that I think anybody prefers to work with. She comes to set knowing all her lines. She is intensely focused. She's willing to get her hands dirty, which not all actresses are. And by that I mean covered in blood, not complaining. I think she did this limp during the whole movie, if I remember right. And that's a hard thing to do. It's an affectation that is challenging because it's exhausting. She gave that to her character, might have been in the script, but she certainly pulled it off well. And I was very happy to have worked with her. And after all these years, we still keep in touch. I did enjoy working with Brad Wyman too. Brad is not your typical Hollywood producer. He never had a grouch face like producers often do on sets. They're usually chain smoking and, walking around and wondering why the hell there's 6 donuts purchased and not 3 because no one's gonna eat those and you're wasting company money. Brad was never like that. He was always very calm on set. And he had this kind of easygoing California vibe, which was very new to me coming from Michigan. I'd never experienced that before. And it was very refreshing and nice to be an actor on a set like that. It relaxed everybody, and everybody I think was more at their best because Brad was there. The crew was really young too, and it felt like a college project shooting that more than a feature film. There was a sense while we were shooting that we were all pooling together to make this project, for some class. That's what it felt like, and I mean that in the sense of everybody was family on that picture. It really was.
This really is clothing for a divine soul.
The critics destroyed it. I think it was critically annihilated, but what did you expect? I mean, we all knew that was going to happen when we made the thing. I mean, they were just going to compare it to Sounds of the Lambs and some other, B-slasher pictures at the time, and it was expected, but it was disappointing, but also wonderful. We wouldn't have wanted anything else, A triumph of cinema. No, this is not a triumph of cinema. But it is an interesting little slasher film. When I do horror conventions, people ask me about Skinner a great deal, and they bring their VHS copies and posters that they found online. I don't know why it has such staying power. I didn't think it would, but I'm very glad it does. That movie cemented my place in B-horror. It really helped me out a lot. I got a lot of horror pictures after that one. So I was glad I made that. Looking back now, 20-some years, it was worth it.